Welcome to part 2 of What on Earth is Happening at the Breakdown. In this two-part video series, we're going step by step through the application of laws governing the breakdown as tackles and rucks proceed. I'm going to pick up from where we left off in part 1, so if you haven't watched part 1, please do watch that first and then come back to part 2. I've got a link in the description section. Again, we're using the Carlo, Tizzano, Jack Morgan breakdown from July 2025. We've defined that Carlo Tizzano has entered the breakdown, which by legal definition is currently a tackle, and he is legally competing for the ball. Now let's see what happens when the next player in, Jack Morgan, arrives. And this is where we start talking about the ruck laws. How to transform a tackle into a ruck. Law 15.2 states a ruck is formed when one or more players from each team are in contact and over the ball. Tizzano is the only one over the ball here, so this is not a ruck yet. Something for you to remember, a breakdown is almost always a tackle first and then is transformed into a ruck. Once both teams have a player over the ball on his or her feet, it's a ruck. Law 15. A tackle can transform into a ruck, but a ruck cannot transform back to a tackle. So with Jack Morgan arriving at the tackle, what are his options? Well, they're very limited. He must either avoid creating a ruck altogether and try to grab the ball before Tizzano does, which is basically impossible at this point, like it's Tizzano's ball to win. Or he needs to transform the tackle into a ruck, and he does that by binding onto Tizzano. Now, before we dig into Morgan's actions, we need to go off on another little tangent into Law 9 for foul play. Now, these laws must be considered at all times, but they actually add some confusion here. 9.4 states, a player must not intentionally prevent an opponent from having the opportunity to play the ball, other than by competing for possession. The law allows Morgan to try to grab the ball, but don't impede Tizzano. Now, reading that suggests Morgan can't just go in and clear out Tizzano. So how's he allowed to do so? Let's go to Law 920, dangerous play in a ruck or maul. Now, we're not in a ruck yet, just remember we're still in a tackle, but in 920 we have a couple of things to highlight. 920D. A player may remove the stealer, jackler, from the tackle area by pushing, driving them backwards, but must not roll, pull or twist the opponent. This allows Morgan to clear out Tizzano. But let's go back one. 920A says a player must not charge into a ruck or maul. Charging includes any contact made without binding onto another player in the ruck or maul. We're going to get the binding definition a little later, but here's the grey area. Is Law 920 giving permission to a player to clear out a tackle without binding? It's listed in the rucks and mauls area, and 920A clearly identifies all players must bind. Now, the way I read 920 is that through the lens of foul play, 920D allows an arriving player, Morgan, to clear out a jackler, Tizzano, but adherence to 920A is required. That is, he must bind with the jackler. Do you agree with that? So I'm going to concentrate on laws 14 and 15 from here on out, but I just wanted to highlight that little grey area in Law 9. Do you agree with my interpretation? Just let me know. Let's get back to Morgan's play. So Law 15.7, a player must bind onto a teammate or an opposition player. The bind must precede or be simultaneous with contact with any other part of the body. Quick look at the definition of binding, which according to the laws is grasping another player's body firmly between the shoulders and the hips with the whole arm in contact from hand to shoulder. That's a mouthful, but I think most rugby players get what a bind is. As the arriving player, Jack Morgan must not only bind with Tizzano, but he must also adhere to Law 15.3, head and shoulders no lower than his hips. So here's a freeze frame of Morgan just before he enters the tackle. And that body position, ladies and gentlemen, is absolutely glorious. Head and shoulders at hip height and driving through with his power. Every coach's dream. Morgan looks fantastic here, but he's attempting to transform the tackle into a ruck, and to do so he must bind. Let's play it through. By the rugby definition of binding, he fails to bind when clearing out Tizzano. That means he does not transform this tackle into a ruck prior to clearing Tizzano out. That is illegal by my interpretation. Let's just pretend for a second that Morgan did manage to bind with Tizzano. What would each player have had to have done then? 15.11 says another mouthful. Let me try and get through it. Once a ruck has formed, no player may handle the ball unless they were able to get their hands on the ball before the ruck formed and stay on their feet. Okay, yeah, I'll get that. So if Tizzano had the ball, he'd be entitled to hold on to it unless he went to ground himself. 15.12 says players must endeavour to remain on their feet throughout the ruck. The word endeavour is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. Was Morgan endeavouring to keep his feet? Again, refs will look at things differently. I don't think Morgan intentionally went off his feet. In fact, he probably went to ground because he cleared Tizzano out so forcefully. So he probably was endeavouring to keep his feet. So I'd probably agree with a referee that sort of said play on. And then finally, let's go to laws 15.17, 18, 19 and 20, which define how a ruck ends. Ultimately, the only way a ruck can end is if the ball is won by either team and cleared out, or if the ref stops play for a penalty or a restart of some sort. So you can see that the breakdown laws really begin at law 14.1 for the tackle, and progress to law 15.20 for rucks. These are critical laws for a rugby fan to understand, and once you read them, you'll understand just how much work referees are really putting in at every breakdown. So Nigel Owens refereed 100 test matches. He's one of my favourite refs and always worth hearing from. Let's see if he agrees with my interpretation.
But to answer your question, there is nothing else Jack Morgan can do here. Everything he's doing is legal. The fact he does go to ground after the attempted clear out is pretty much irrelevant because he doesn't come in diving on the ground. He's coming in low to try to remove a player, and then he does and then goes off the feet himself. That is allowed.
Okay, so Nigel's just shat all over what I had to say. So that's fine. I'm fine. So where do I go with that? Nigel Owens used the word attempted, but nowhere does the laws allow for attempted binding. To me, the laws of the game are clear. The arriving player must bind. Morgan had to bind. Unless I'm mistaken, there's also no definition in the rugby laws of a clear out or a clean out. All we have is 15.10. Possession may be won by rucking or pushing the opposing team off the ball. Now, you're allowed to do so once the ruck is formed, but not before it, and not during the tackle. Binding is essential. So I'm basically disagreeing with Nigel here. In the media after the game, one or two pundits and ex-players asked what was Morgan supposed to do, and implied that no one knows or that he was in an impossible position. Well, I think it's fairly clear. Step 1 is bind with Tizzano and turn the tackle into a ruck. In reality though, that breakdown was over very quickly. Tizzano's competed extremely well for the ball and drawn the error from Morgan, who should have been penalised. And that's the way the game's played. Morgan was beaten by Tizzano in that passage of play. Happens all the time. Do I think the refs got it right? No. Do I think it was a straightforward call? Yes and no. If the ref called this a penalty in real time, he'd probably be inconsistent with half a dozen similar cleanouts during the game. Personally, I think the biggest problem is that the world is forced to look at this in slow motion. We see this type of cleanout 20 times a game. In real time, it's usually play on, but in slow motion, it's a penalty. We'll find infringements everywhere with replays. Player safety. The point of this video series was to show the laws governing the breakdown and how a tackle legally transforms into a ruck. So I'm departing from that slightly here just to discuss a couple of things that popped up after the game. For clarity, Morgan cannot just hit Tizzano in the head or neck. Tizzano is legally entitled to be over the ball. Does Morgan hit the back of the head? I believe so I believe that's a penalty. But it's incredibly difficult for a referee to actually see it. He's got a minute on the field and must make a call. Look, I've been watching this footage for a week, and seriously, who would be a referee? If you care, don't just abuse refs or throw shade at opposing fans, or aspiring YouTubers. Learn the laws. This game is fascinating. Every weekend there's something new and something challenging referees, players, coaches, fans, and the commentators. Definitely the commentators. Okay, if you've made it this far through the videos, you're an absolute legend. Thank you so much. If you enjoyed it, please let me know and feel free to ask if you have any questions about the game. This was a tricky topic, and deep dives into the laws might be riveting to me, but maybe not for everyone. If you disagree with anything that I've said, hit me up in the comments, but please remember, the required reading is laws 14 and 15. See you next time.